Hey, what's up, my people? John Middlekauff, new YouTube channel. What I need you to do, subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, share with your friends. Appreciate everyone that has. It's the podcast, 3 and Out. You can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple, Spotify. We got you covered. Also, thevolume.com. We got merch right here. FlexFit hat. Go to thevolume.com. Get yourself a 3 and Out hat. What is going on, everybody? Happy Friday. Lot going on in the football world still. A lot of anger over the Dallas Cowboys and their lack of action. As Skip Bayless famously tweeted, all in, comma, my ass. I did some numbers and dove into their cap situation, and I've been banging this home for a while. It's not that complicated why they didn't do much. The Chargers, I think, had some moves the last couple days that should not be stunning to anyone when it comes to Jim Harbaugh and their new general manager from the Ravens, Joe Horowitz. And the Browns did something that I kind of missed. Once I saw Flacco went to the Colts, I'm like, wait, who's the Browns backup quarterback? And then I realized Jameis signed. Can't judge anyone on their words. You got to judge them on their actions. And I have a couple thoughts there, as well as Fugazi Friday, one of my favorite moments of the week. But before Dan Campbell and Brett Holmes got extended as well. But before we dive in to some football stuff, I got to tell you about my friends at Gametime. What I need you to do right now, go to your smartphone. Got my AirPods right now in my ear, and download a little application called Gametime. They're the official ticketing app of this podcast. You can go to anything. Basketball games, football games, baseball games, right around the corner. You want to get outside, take in some sun when it gets warm? I got you covered. Gametime, promo code John, John, save $20 off. You want to go to a concert? I see a lot of people on Instagram all the time. This person's going on tour. This band's coming back. This person's touring with this guy. Love me some live music. Love having a few pops. Go enjoy yourself out and about. Gametime. Search any venue. Search any city. Promo code John. The freak out for the Dallas Cowboys, once you dive into the numbers, is kind of laughable. I've just been loosely saying it because I know the way they've always operated, at least in since they've been good the last decade, right? I want good relative to them. I mean, they've had a consistent winning team. They pay their own guys a lot of money. But when you pay your own guys at a lot of different positions, it typically adds up. So a lot of these teams coming into free agency that have cap space, most of them have kind of had some turmoil on their roster. The Texans, good example. One, a couple of their best players are rookies. They're not paying that many players, right? So these teams with the football team Commanders, the reason they had a bunch of cap space, they got rid of a bunch of dudes. They didn't have a lot of guys on their roster making any money. And everyone's like, how are the Cowboys signing nobody? Well, there's a reason, like in college, when your parents come visit or your roommate's parents come visit and you go out to dinner, it's always a highlight because most of the time you're just eating like burritos and sandwiches. And then family comes into town and you go eat at like a steakhouse. They pick up the bill. Why? They have the money. You have none. You couldn't even afford to pick up the bill if you wanted to. Same thing in free agency. Teams that don't have any cap space can't afford any high-priced players. So I looked. The highest cap hit in the National Football League this year is Deshaun Watson, who we'll get into a little later, at $63+ million. That is an enormous hit. Currently, because they haven't messed with the contract or extended him, and the only way they're going to mess with the contract is extending him, the second highest cap hit is Dakota Prescott at $59.4 million. That is his cap hit under the $250 million number. I think it's $255. That accounts for almost 23% of the cap. Now, if Dak Prescott was the only player on the team, you'd have a lot of money to deal with. Here's the problem. They have 6 other players on their roster, including Dak, that add up to 54% of their salary cap. So between not Dexter Lawrence, his name's escaping me. I don't want to screw it up. The Lawrence they have, the pass rusher, Boise State. CeeDee Lamb, Zach Martin, Trayvon Diggs, and Michael Gallup. and Dak Prescott. So you're talking Dak, Lawrence, CD, Zach Martin, Diggs, Gallup. That's 6 players, 6 total players. Last I checked, you got a 53-man roster, 22 starters. Those 6 guys headed into the season. Now, there have been some rumors they might trade Gallup, but as of today, they're cap compliant, 54%. Those 3 players. It adds up to almost $140 million worth of cap space. Not how much money they're making, just their cap hits. That is what matters when it comes to signing free agents. They didn't have any cap room, and they usually don't because they always pay their players. Now, when you're paying guys like CeeDee Lamb or Zach Martin, I know Trayvon Diggs got hurt last year, but he's, a playmaker. And even Dak Prescott, if that number's a little lower, whatever, it's the cost of doing business. But when you get into this situation, and this is the problem with the Browns, like the Cowboys can fix this problem if they want. They just have to choose to extend them. And I would understand if they went, because you always get to this position, it happens in the NBA all the time, where the guy is clearly not a top 6-7 player in the NBA. Sometimes not even a top 12 player. You're like, well, he's our guy. We got to give him that $250 million contract. You're like, that's a bad idea. Now, Dak Prescott is a really solid player, especially in the regular season. The playoffs the last 3 years have been pretty underwhelming. They've been a disaster. I think 5 interceptions in those 3 playoff games. And let's face it, you just expect more. Well, the cost of doing business for these starting quarterbacks is really, really high. I mean, we're talking about Tua Tagovailoa getting $45-50 million a year. So if you're Dak Prescott, like, if I'm going to do an extension, you're probably talking, give or take, $200 million in guaranteed money. And, I would imagine at minimum $47-48 million per year. Could be as high as $55 million. I understand thinking twice about that. I do. And I totally understand if you're like, let's play this out. But when you do that, let's play this out. Because over the last couple of years, he hasn't quite earned like a locked extension. You find yourself in this position. You could handle the CeeDee Lamb, Zach Martin, Trayvon Diggs cap hits. Those are 4, 5, 6% of your salary cap. When Dak Prescott's 23%, it's going to impact being able to sign some of these players. It just is. So I don't think it's that crazy why they didn't sign anybody. They have cap problems. The Chargers, who also had cap problems. One thing I think you need to do when any new person comes into a job in the NFL is go, one, what scheme do they run? And philosophically, especially if it's a guy that has history, what do they like? What type players do they, and how philosophically do they build a football team? And when I close my eyes and I say Jim Harbaugh, my mind doesn't go to like scoring touchdowns and lighting up the scoreboard. It goes to the line of scrimmage, the offensive and defensive lines. Well, they had 4 guys that were pretty polarizing coming in with their cap situation. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. Well, Khalil Mack had 17 sacks last year. Sacks aren't everything, but I Googled it today. He has not missed a game in 2 years for the Chargers. He had 8 sacks 2 years ago, 17 this year. Obviously, I think one game he had 5 or 6, so it inflates it a little bit, but he's still a darn good player. Jim Harbaugh, Khalil Mack, those 2 guys go together. Joey Bosa, a little more polarizing because he's injured a lot. When he's on the field, he's a really solid to above average player who plays a very, very important position, pass rusher. So when I saw that they restructured Khalil Mack and then they also did the same with Joey Bosa, not shocking at all. Their general manager comes from the Baltimore Ravens, who I've said for a while, the Chargers are going to become the Ravens West. They're going to want the same type players. They are going to aspire to have the same group of like-minded guys. Football all the time, tough, just fucking let's get into the ring and have a heavyweight match. That's how Jim Harbaugh has now coached his football team for 20 plus years as a head coach. Whether it's at San Diego, Stanford, the 49ers, and Michigan. He has stayed very, very consistent. Besides a couple years when he went to the spread offense with Josh Gaddis from Alabama, and he hated it. He turned around, went the other way, hired Sharon Moore, and they built a bully, and they just won a national championship. His brother, the Ravens were built like from that mentality before he even got there. But obviously with Lamar, the running attack, like it's pretty clear the type team he's going to build. So I love Mike Williams. I understand why he got let go. Hurt, plays wide receiver. Like I would much rather, like if I'm Jim Harbaugh and Joe Horowitz, the way they fundamentally view football, you go, are they going to lean with the defensive lineman or the wide receiver? If all things are relatively equal, they're always going to go with the lineman. That's the way it is, right? That's the way it's going to be. It's why a lot of people think they're going to take the offensive lineman in the first round. Time will tell. But the least stunning thing so far in free agency is that Jim Harbaugh likes Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa to be on his football team moving forward. The thrill and excitement of March Mania is here. And DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top-rated sportsbook apps, is giving new customers a shot to turn $5 into $150 instantly in bonus bets with any college basketball bet. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code JOHN, John. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. The Browns. I've been saying this forever when it comes to football teams, when it comes to coaches, executives, and even players. I judge you on your actions, not your words. And that's just a fundamental way I view the world. I don't care what you say. I'm from California. A lot of people say one thing and do something completely different. So I only judge you on your actions. Anyone in business knows anyone can say anything. Like what you actually follow through on, what you actually do is all I actually care about. And when you look at the Browns last year and even moving forward, the Deshaun Watson contract situation and just his play is one of, I would say, one of the more interesting stories in the NFL. And before he got injured, it was not that interesting because it was kind of a disaster. And they fired everyone on offense. And they brought in a new offensive coordinator. They brought in new offensive assistant coaches. Obviously, their head coach is an offensive coordinator as well. But they did that to tailor to Deshaun Watson because their entire success moving forward is going to be on the back of a guy taking up $63 million a year on their cap this year, next year, and the following year. If he does not play, I would say as a borderline top 12 quarterback, they got no fucking chance. You're not going to be able to build the team well enough with that level of cap taken to the one player if he's not playing or if he just plays like he did. Every Browns fan knows, beside the one half of football, his Browns career has been an utter disaster. And now he's coming off an injury. Well, the first hope of the Deshaun Watson era happened when Flacco came in, resurrected the franchise, and led him into the playoffs and made some huge plays. And it was just a fun story. Well, I looked. Joe Flacco didn't return to the Browns. He went to the Colts. My first thought was, God, I wonder if did they give him a lot more money? Because the Browns signed Jameis Winston. Well, Jameis Winston got $4 million guaranteed. Well, Joe Flacco, I saw he got an $8.5 million contract. I'm like, I totally understand. Flacco, you can't turn that down, that type of money. And then I Googled his contract. He got $4.5 million guaranteed. So they essentially got the same thing. You know why the Browns didn't bring back Joe Flacco? Because next year, if Deshaun Watson looks like he has looked earlier in his Cleveland Browns career, they will start chanting for Joe Flacco in the stadium. It will be all anyone talks about. The Browns had no choice. It wasn't about the money. They could not bring back Joe Flacco because he would be the elephant in the room the moment Deshaun Watson had a bad game. If he had two bad games, people would be like, you have to put this guy in. And let's face it, the organization does not have a choice, at least for, if he's healthy, I would say the next 25 plus games. All your chips are in the middle of the table. I understand why they did it, but it's a reflection that they're worried about everything surrounding this Deshaun Watson situation. They got to be nervous about it. This was clearly going back to an owner-led operation, but none of, in terms of the contract, and he already turned them down. They said they guarantee every penny. None of that matters now. It's 2024. The contract's the contract. The team's the team. He just better play well because now you're making decisions where you bring in lesser players, players that you're not even comfortable around. Like this guy's already been in your building, your teams likes him. So this is a reflection of the Deshaun Watson decision from years ago. And I don't know. I'd bet against it, but buckle up, Cleveland, because it's going to be fascinating either way. And before we get into Fugazi Friday, the Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, I think anytime you go to a team in professional sports that has been really, really shitty and everything around said team is negative and have success, that's one of the most success. That's one of the most impressive things you can do, because you don't just need to overcome your opponent. You have to overcome what fans think, what the owner thinks, what honestly the players think. Now, in football, you turn over your roster a lot, but it feels like in my life, the Detroit Lions were, for a long time, it was the Tampa Bay Bucks. If you're older than me, if you're like a 50-year-old, like in the 80s and throughout a large percentage of the early 90s, they were called the Yucks because they were so terrible. They were basically an expansion team for 15 plus years. For a long period of time, the Lions have fallen under that category, right? Some of their more famous plays of my lifetime is Orlovsky running out of the back of the end zone. Just really bad teams that drafted high a lot, teams that did not go to the playoffs, definitely did not win playoff games. Within 3 years, Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes not only built up this roster has to be one of the better young rosters in the NFL. They flipped Matt Stafford and immediately found a quarterback who is more than functional for them on a team-friendly deal and started winning and ended Aaron Rodgers' career in Green Bay. And then a year later, got the Detroit Lions to the NFC Championship game for the first time in 30 plus years. So they got extensions, even though they already had 6-year contracts, which I would imagine Dan Campbell, I don't know if he was the lowest paid coach in the league, but he definitely wasn't one of the higher, got a substantial raise. And just as a football fan, as anyone, as a fan of people that aren't scared, because this is not an easy job to take. He took this job knowing if this is a disaster, one, you're going to be a laughingstock and you're never getting another shot. And they went in it, they rolled up their sleeves, and they built a bully fast. And they're continuing to make good moves. I have a lot of respect as a football fan watching their team play. I mean, they came into San Francisco in that NFC Championship game. They ended up fucking it up at the end. But goddamn, they came in kicking ass and taking names. So props to Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, and it's cool to see the Detroit Lions good. Okay, let's end on Fugazi Friday. The tipping thing is just relentless. I get daily DMs about tipping, and I don't think there is any current bigger Fugazi than the tipping situation in America. We've already established it's out of control, and the only way to kind of take it back is to refuse to do it at the times of like, I just bought frozen chicken here at the store. I'm not giving you a $5 tip. Obviously, if in different services, you should tip. But everywhere you turn to have to tip is outrageous. I noticed this a couple years ago. When I first moved to Arizona, I rented an apartment, and there was this CVS very close to me. And you'd go into the CVS, and there'd be a couple people working, right? Just, I'd say behind the counter, but they were never behind the counter. And I would just go there to get basic necessities, right? Razors, lotion, some snacks here and there, just stuff like that, body wash. And call me old school. I still like it. Obviously, if there's a long line, I'll just go to the self checkout. But if there's just one person, like I do like just checking out. I don't know, the normal way. And they would refuse to ever check you out. They're like, you got to go to the self checkout. And I think to myself, like, what's the point of this? Like, what are you even doing here? And then I moved from Paradise Valley area to North Scottsdale, probably 15, 20 minutes away. And on one side of me, there's this big grocery store. It's called Fry's. I don't know if they're a national chain. I've never really been around Fry's. Really nice grocery store. And then just your old faithful, probably the other way, Safeway. And both of them fall under the same category. They have, I don't know, 8+ old school checkout ways, right? Where people are standing there. You put your stuff on the conveyor belt and you just buy your groceries and you go on with your merry way. And then they have the self checkout. Every time I go, whether it's rush hour and the place is packed, and both these places, especially the Fries, is an absolute zoo. There will be, usually there's like 1 through 8 in the lights. My entire life, most of the lights lit up. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. There's the one line, like 15 lines or 50 items, 15 items or less. They're never lit up and there's no one there. The whole thing is just self checkout, which clearly times change, things change. I get it. What's the point of even having the lines anymore? I don't even get it. Like, what are we doing? What's the point of having the employee who's not like the produce guy? He's not behind in the deli. He's got to stand in there. He's not even stocking the shelves. It's like, yeah, he never really has an answer. He's like, oh, here's a self-checkout. Like, yeah, I'm buying some booze. Like, well, let me see your ID. Well, what are you actually doing? Just kind of herding the cattle here? And I've got this on a couple DMs. What is going on with our checkout situation? Because I would understand if you just didn't have any employees in there. Like, okay, it's just robots, self-checkout, get it. But there are literally guys just standing there looking at you right next to where the checkout aisle, because they still exist, and they just kind of stare at you. There's like a stare off. Like, who's going to win? Like, could you ring me up? Especially some of these checkout lines. That's the other thing. If, the Fry's actually equipped with 2 sides, the Safeway only has 1 side. It get really backed up. So it's like, God, I'm going to be waiting here for a minute. And there's 3, there's Billy, Joe, and Megan up there in their outfit working for the operation. It's like, hey, could you ring me up? No, I can't. You just gonna stare at the ceiling here? Like, I got some Ben and Jerry's here. It's melting. Hell, I'll tip you to check me out. And they just kind of stare at you, and nothing ever happens. So it's a wild transitional period right now with the self checkout and the old school people that I always will be. My unborn children won't even know what it'll be like to go out. Obviously, the fast food chains are definitely going that way. Don't totally hate that. Like, I know what I want when I go to McDonald's or Taco Bell, hit a couple buttons and get it delivered to me. But if I have chickens and steaks and produce, like I do like that interaction. I'm a sucker for it. But it feels like that is long gone, and now you just have to self-checkout, despite there literally being checkers standing right there at you. I mean, talk about a growing Fugazi right now in America.